20 years ago, my life seemed picture perfect. Debbie and I were blissfully happy after putting back together, a long marriage that I had nearly destroyed 20 years earlier by an affair. And it's only because of her forgiveness am I able to have a story worth sharing. And I hope that you will take away the power of forgiveness in saving marriages and changing lives. I was at the peak of my career as an international art dealer. In fact, I had just made the headlines for selling a world-famous masterpiece to the billionaire president of the largest company in the world. My legacy that I knew now was firmly intact was about to be drastically altered, and my life story completely rewritten by a dream and by an encounter with a crazy, homeless ex-con known as suicide. The dream, as Debbie was telling me the next morning, she was so excited, and she said, "Ron, I had this dream about a homeless man who was poor but wise, and by his wisdom, our city and our lives will be changed." She said, "I saw his face." And she said, "Would you please go with me in the inner city of Fort Worth to see if we can find this man in my dream?" So later that afternoon, we began volunteering at a homeless shelter. We'd been there a couple of weeks and getting ready to serve an evening meal to about 300 homeless people. And all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose in the dining hall when in storms this giant-looking man wearing no shirt and no shoes, and he's screaming at the top of his lungs that he's going to kill everybody in the building. He's going to kill whoever stole his shoes. And Debbie said, "That's him." And I said, "That's who?" And she said, "That's the man in my dream." And I said, "Which one?" And she said, "The one threatening to kill everybody." And then she looked at me and she said, "And Ron, I believe I heard from God that you have to be his friend and find out if my dream is real." I said, "But Debbie, I was not at that meeting you had with God. And if I'm going to be friends with someone who wants to kill everybody, I think I should go talk to God myself." Well, I did have a talk with God. And though I didn't hear an audible voice, I know that he said, being friends with a homeless man is a small price to pay for the forgiveness that he and Debbie had shown me. And so for Debbie, I stepped out from behind the serving line and began a 5-month cat and mouse chase throughout the inner city in hot pursuit of this wise man of her dream. And I finally get him in my car, and we go to breakfast one morning. And to start the conversation, I said, "Hey, I know your name is not Suicide. Do you mind telling me your name?" He said, "Ain't nobody's business what my name is, and I don't tell nobody my name." So, okay, well, I said, "If it's any interest to you, my name is Ron Hall." He thought about it a second, and he said, "Denver. Name's Denver." And he said, "What is it y'all want from me?" He said, "Man, I've had no peace in my life since you and your wife showed up on the street." And I said, "Hey, I just want to be your friend." And he looked at me with this incredulous look, and he said, "You won't be my friend?" I said, "That's it, man. That's all I want to be." He said, "Wow, I'm going to have to think about that." And I want to tell you, that got all over me. I thought, how in the world could this poor homeless man with nothing need to think about being friends with me, a rich man who could give him everything? I tell you, I was so arrogant. I didn't believe he had one thing to offer me in a friendship. And a couple of weeks later, I saw him taking trash out of his dumpster and feeding the wild birds on the street. And I invited him to go to Starbucks. And so we're sitting there on the sidewalk, drinking our coffee, and I'm trying to explain to him my life as an art dealer, and he was not impressed nor interested. So he interrupted me, and he said, "Hey, I've been thinking a lot about what you asked me." I said, "Really? What did I ask you that required any thought at all?" He said, "You asked me if I'd be your friend." I said, "Oh, I sure did. So what do you think about that?" He said, well, now I'm going to tell you the truth. There's something I heard about you white folks that really bothers me, and it's got to do with fishing. I said, well, Denver, I'm not a fisherman, and so I don't know that I can answer the question. He said, I bet you can, because I need an answer before I decide if I'm going to be your friend. I said, okay, then ask. And he said, okay. He said, I heard when white folks go fishing, they do this thing they call catch and release. Well, of course they do, Denver. It's a sport. You don't get it? I said, no, sir, I don't get it. Because back on the plantation where I grew up in Louisiana, we'd go out in the morning, we'd cut us a cane pole and dig us a can full of worms, sit on the riverbank all day, and when we finally got something on our line, we were really proud of what we caught. And we'd take it back to the plantation and share it with all the folk. He said, so it occurred to me, if you just a white man fishing for a friend, and you gonna catch and release, poof, I ain't got no desire to be your friend. But if you're fishing for a real friend, then I'll be your friend for life. And my mind flashed back to Debbie's dream of this poor man who was wise, because what he spoke to me at that moment was the wisest thing I had ever heard on friendship. And let me tell you, I was hooked. And that was the first life lesson of many life lessons to come. But that's the number one reason that I'm standing on this stage tonight. So, for life lesson number one, friends don't catch and release friends. So my new friend and I were sitting on the curb by his dumpster a couple of days later, and he kind of got silent for a minute, then he looked into my eyes and he said, Mr. Ron, is you one of them Christians? And thinking maybe he had seen a halo over my head, I looked up and I didn't see it. But I said, yes, why do you think I'm down here helping? He said, helping? You think putting spaghetti on a plate is helping anybody? He said, no, man, you ain't helping nobody. But yourself feel better about yourself. What you're doing is blessing us, and we appreciate your blessing. But helping, well, that's a whole nother thing. And he said, but that ain't what I want to talk to you about. I said, well, okay, well, what do you want to talk to me about? He said, I want to know, why is it that all you Christians worship one homeless man on Sunday and turn your back on the first one you see on Monday? He said, Mr. Ron, you never know whose eyes God is watching you out of, and it ain't going to be your preacher or your Sunday school teacher. He said, it might be a fellow that looks like me. Now, it ain't me, he said, but it might be a fellow that looks just like me, and God's checking you out to see what kind of person you really are. So life lesson number two, you never know whose eyes God is watching you out of. So Denver told me, he said that most people see the homeless as a problem. But he said through God's eyes, God sees them as an opportunity for the faithful to show his love. And in fact, on his own, he came up with a grand plan on how to end homelessness in America. And it was if every church, synagogue, and mosque in America would take in just one homeless person, he said we could solve the problem. And he said, in fact is, if every church takes them one, he said, some churches ain't getting none because there's more churches than there are homeless. So we can take care of this problem in 30 days. So life lesson number three is most people see the homeless as a problem, but God sees them as an opportunity to show his love. And with that little bit of wisdom, a couple of mornings later, I stopped by the bank and get me $100 and $1 bills, and I parked my car next to his dumpster, and I tell Denver, you want to go have some fun? He said, yes, sir. So we start walking the streets and shaking hands and passing out dollar bills, and some people that I judged nicer and friendlier and more needy, I would give $2 to, and even a couple of them, I gave $3. But just within a couple of hours or so, we had passed out all the money, and we were heading back down Main Street toward his dumpster. And we encountered a homeless man who was really, really struggling and was really in some kind of pain, and he was trying to stand up. And so being benevolent, I just said, is there anything I can help you with? And he starts slurring his words, so I thought, oh boy. He said, yeah. Couple of dollars would be real nice. So I reached in my pocket and I pulled out my wallet and I saw only a $20 bill, so I stuck it back in there real fast. And Denver said, "Give the man the 20." I said, "No, I'm not going to give the man the 20. I mean, why would I want to contribute to his drunkenness and waste my money on alcohol?" And Denver said, "Listen, Mr. Ron, you give the man the 20 and you will get the blessing. Then it's going to be up to God what he does with the money, what he does, because it's going to be between the man and God what happens next." And I said, "Okay." So I gave the man the 20, told him, "God bless you." And we took off, heading back toward his dumpster. And we get to the first intersection, and he spins me around, and he puts a laser beam stare into my eyes, and he said, "Mr. Ron, that man you just judged is named Jose. And he came here from Mexico, and he chooses to live on the streets and eat his meals in the mission so he can send all his money back to Mexico." Said he was the hardest working man on the streets, and he worked nearly every day as a rock man and a bricklayer until a few months ago when he had a stroke. And now he ain't got no money, he ain't got no medical care, and he don't have any way to get back to Mexico. So you judged a man without knowing what caused him to be like he is. And he says, "So what do you see down at the end of the street down there?" We were standing on Main Street in Fort Worth, and the only thing I could see at the end of the street, I said, "Well, I see a courthouse." He said, "Yeah, you sure do." And he said, "Let me tell you something. That courthouse is full of judges, and God ain't looking for no more of them." He said, "So if you're going to be walking these streets with me, you leave your judge's robe hanging in your closet, and you come down on these streets as a servant." Okay, Denver. Life lesson number 4. Don't judge a person unless we've taken time to listen to their story. Our friendship was growing deeper, and he really was becoming and became a part of our family. And our times together were frequent, and they were beautiful and fun. And one day we were having lunch, and he got a really sad look on his face, and I said, "What's wrong, Denver?" He said, "Oh, Mr. Ron," he said, "what Miss Debbie is doing for the homeless here on the streets, she has become precious to God." He said, "When you become precious to God, you become important to the enemy." He said, "Watch your backside, something bad getting ready to happen to Miss Debbie." 3 days later, she was diagnosed with cancer, stage 4 liver and colon cancer that doctors said was incurable. And for the next 19 months, as we fought the battle of all battles, the man that I once thought had nothing to offer me in a friendship gave me the greatest gift that I had ever received. He stayed up all night long praying for Miss Debbie and me and our family. And he would show up at the hospital room or our door the next day in filthy rags and smelling like smoke, but he always had an inspirational message of encouragement for us. And I just would marvel and think, how in the world did God choose the most raggedy, poorest man in our city to be the one that encouraged us most through the darkest days of our lives? Life lesson number 5, you never judge a man wearing a poor coat or suit of clothes, because it might be hiding a rich heart that is full of compassion. On her last day on earth, he showed up like he had done for most every day of those 19 months. But on this day, he said he had a private message from God that he wanted to deliver Miss Debbie. So he went in her room and he stood beside her and he said, "Miss Debbie, I was talking to God last night, and he told me the only reason that you've been hanging on this long is because you don't know who's going to take care of the homeless when you pass." He said, "But God told me last night," he said, "go tell Miss Debbie to lay down her torch for the homeless. In Denver, you pick it up and you carry it for the rest of your life." He said, "So that's what I'm going to do." And she asked him to speak at her service, and she asked him to share another dream that she had of a beautiful homeless mission. And when they got through talking, he kneeled beside her bed. He gave her a kiss on the forehead and said, "I'll see you on the other side, Miss Debbie." Her final words to me were, "Please don't give up on Denver. God is going to bless your friendship in a way that you can never imagine." 3 days later, he stood before a large crowd in a big church. And he told about how 25 years on the street he had lost all hope. He said that he had become a bad man, a crazy and dangerous man. He said he was full of hell, but Miss Debbie never gave up on him. She just kept blessing him and blessing him and blessing him until she was able to bless the hell right out of him. And he said it was the love of Miss Debbie that became the hope of glory for him. He told about how he first met Miss Debbie, and when she first met him, he said, she was so different from me, and I was so different from her that I just knew we were never going to have no kind of friendship. But he said, I soon discovered, and now millions of moviegoers and readers know his beautiful words, that everybody's different, just the same kind of different as me. He said, we're all just regular folks walking down the road that God done set in front of us. And the truth of the matter is, whether we's rich or whether we's poor or whether we's something in between, this earth ain't no final resting place. So in a way, we all homeless, just working our way home. When he got finished sharing her dream for this beautiful new mission, he got a standing ovation from more than 1,000 people at a funeral. And by noon the next day, money began pouring in to build this mission of her dream. Life's lesson number 6. We are all homeless, just working our way home. Ours was no catch and release friendship. For shortly after Debbie died, Denver moved into my home, and we lived together until he passed and went and joined her in heaven. And during those many years that we lived together, we traveled across America, raising money for the homeless and spreading a message that it's not the color of our skin that divides us, it's the condition of our hearts. And when we completed raising $15 million to build the mission of her dreams, Denver was honored as the Philanthropist of the Year for the city of Fort Worth. And when he stood on the stage to receive his honor, he said, a lot of you folks thought I was just trash on y'all's streets. But did y'all know that God is in the recycling business? He can turn trash into a treasure. Life lesson number 7. God is in the recycling business of turning trash into treasure. Just a couple of years later, when Denver became a New York Times best-selling author, we were invited to the White House. And Denver said that was a miracle because back on the plantation, he was taught that the White House was only for white people. But on this day, he was honored by the entire Bush family in a private luncheon in the living quarters of the White House. And we were speaking in Washington at the Symphony Center for Barbara Bush's Foundation on Literacy. But as we were leaving the White House that day, he started laughing hysterically, and I said, what is so funny, Denver? He said, think about this, Mr. Ron. I done gone from living in the bushes to eating with the bushes. He said, God bless America. This is a great country. And yes, I agree. It is a great country. And I'll tell you, I learned so many life lessons from this beautiful man. But there are so many life lessons for all of us to learn from beautiful people like him that we think are so different. As I found out, serving people from behind a serving line in the homeless shelter really only makes us feel better about ourselves, and we are blessing them with that. But if we really want to help somebody, we need to come out from behind the serving line and sit down with just one of them and learn their life story. And maybe you'll find out that they're just the same kind of different as you. And I promise if you do that, both of you will be blessed. And hopefully together, we can all make the same kind of difference. Thank you very much.